I think we're going to see investment in a number of areas. I think the two that are very interesting right now are firstly in the innovation and entrepreneurship space. And the second, I think, is with all of the natural gas finds coming online. I think that's over time going to lead to something of a resurgence in low-cost manufacturing in the United States. If we were to look in the short run, I think the startup world, the technology world, and the innovation spaces are all very exciting and very active. Stanford was involved in the formation of a son 50 years ago, and at the time it was a very modest beginning with just 50 students in a class. They've added an undergraduate program. It's a fully formed university with many kinds of programs. So tremendous growth and accelerating growth, which I think is consistent with the growth in the Peruvian economy in the last decade. I think there's a big need for the kind of education that his son continues to provide. When I look at his son today and I think about what's going on at Stanford is globalization of management education. So I think the leading schools of management have to become global because the world of business is global. One of the really interesting features of Silicon Valley is that there's a culture in Silicon Valley that accepts failure. And that is very important actually, because if you're going to innovate, there's a good chance you will not succeed. I think in some regions what we discover is that failure is really not as acceptable as it is in other regions. And I think that's something culturally that if you want to embrace innovation, you also have to understand that with it comes a risk you won't succeed. The second is that I would point to is access to capital. And what I think we see is that there is actually no shortage of capital at large in the world, but not all companies present themselves to the providers of capital in a way that makes them recognizable to those sources of capital as potential candidates for investment. What we find is that yes, some of your approaches to bringing that technology to bear are going to have to be different. For example, I think most mobile or platform companies in Silicon Valley would be developing products for high bandwidth applications. They would be using smartphones if it's aimed at mobile phones. But if you go to West Africa, where I just was, you see incredibly innovative solutions where people are using SMS technology, using very small numbers of characters to provide very powerful applications to people for whom that is the only technological platform that they have. And so often you see people having to be more inventive, actually, more creative, because the technological forms that can be used to reach a broad audience are different than they are in some other parts of the world.